Dr. James Lawson, a dedicated yet emotionally distant pediatric surgeon, moved with mechanical precision as he prepared for his next operation. The antiseptic aroma that once brought him solace now felt sterile and unwelcoming, much like his life. Scrubbing his hands, he stared into the reflective metal of the sink, his thoughts swirling with memories of Emily, his late wife. She had been his anchor, the one who brought warmth and joy to his life. But since her untimely passing, James had thrown himself into his work, using the chaos of the hospital to distract from the emptiness at home. Even his colleagues noticed the change. "Great work in there, Doctor." "Lawson," a nurse said warmly as he emerged from the OR. James nodded curtly, his tone polite but distant. "Thank you." Her smile faded, and she quickly walked away, leaving James with a pang of guilt. He hated how closed off he had become, but after losing Emily, connection felt like an impossible luxury. Back in his office, James glanced at the photo of Emily on his desk. Her radiant smile seemed frozen in time, mocking his solitude. He ran a finger along the frame. "I miss you," he murmured, his voice barely audible. The weight of grief pressing down on him felt heavier than ever. Seeking a reprieve, James grabbed his coat and left the hospital, letting the cool evening air wash over his face. Without consciously deciding, his feet carried him to the park, a quiet refuge he had avoided since Emily's death. The park was alive with laughter and life, yet James felt like a ghost among the vibrant scene. Families played on the grass and children ran with joyful abandon. The sight stirred an ache in his chest, a reminder of the family he and Emily had dreamed of, but never had. He wandered aimlessly until a sound cut through the din of the park, a baby's cry. Sharp and insistent, it made him stop in his tracks. His instincts as a doctor kicked in, and he scanned the area. Rounding a bend, he saw a small bundle on a park bench. As he approached, his heart twisted. A baby, no more than a few months old, lay crying, his dark brown eyes wide with distress. James looked around, searching for a frantic parent or caregiver, but no one was in sight. "Hey there, little one," he said softly, crouching beside the baby. "Where's your mom or dad?" The child's cries quieted at the sound of James's voice, and for a moment, their eyes met. Something shifted in James's chest, a pang of emotion he hadn't felt in years. Without hesitation, he picked up the baby, cradling him against his chest. The baby whimpered, then calmed, nestling into James as if he belonged there. James's heart ached at the thought of anyone leaving this vulnerable child alone. "It's going to be okay," he whispered, though he wasn't sure if he was speaking to the baby or himself. James hurried back to his car, the baby nestled in the passenger seat. As he drove to the hospital, his mind raced with questions. Who would abandon a baby like this? What kind of life would this child have? In the emergency room, Dr. Sarah Mitchell, a trusted colleague and friend, met him with wide eyes. "James, what's going on?" "I found him in the park," James explained, his voice tight with emotion. "He needs to be checked out." Sarah examined the baby carefully. "He's healthy," she concluded. "No signs of neglect or abuse. But James, what are you planning to do?" James hesitated, staring at the sleeping baby in the crib. For the first time since Emily's death, he felt a flicker of purpose. "I don't know," he admitted, "but I can't just walk away." Sarah raised an eyebrow. "You're serious about this, aren't you?" James nodded. "I think I am." In that moment, James made a decision that would alter the course of his life. The loneliness that had consumed him for so long was no match for the connection he felt to this abandoned child. As James sat by the baby's crib that night, he began to imagine a life beyond his grief, a life where he could be a father, where he could love and be needed again. He leaned closer to the baby and whispered, "You're not alone anymore." The next morning, James awoke with a clarity of purpose that startled him. He had spent the night at the hospital nursery, sitting by the baby's crib as if keeping vigil. The tiny boy stirred as sunlight streamed through the window, blinking up at James with innocent curiosity. James smiled softly. "Good morning, little guy," he murmured. As he stood and stretched, Sarah entered the room with a cup of coffee in hand. "You're still here?" she asked, arching an eyebrow. "I couldn't leave," James admitted, taking the coffee gratefully. Sarah studied him for a moment before speaking. "James, if you're serious about taking him in, there's a lot to consider. This isn't just a temporary situation, it's a lifetime commitment." "I know," James said, his voice firm. "I've thought about it all night. This feels right." Sarah's expression softened. "Okay, but you're going to need help, both with the legal process and, well, everything else." "I'll do whatever it takes," James replied, glancing down at the baby. The first step was giving the baby a name. As James filled out forms at the hospital's social services office, he paused over the blank space labeled name. After a moment's thought, he wrote the name Ethan. Emily had once said she loved the name Ethan. It was simple, strong, and full of promise. James felt a pang of sadness as he remembered their conversations about starting a family. But now, he had the chance to honor her memory. "Hello, Ethan," James said later that evening as he brought the baby home for the first time. His house, though immaculate, suddenly felt inadequate for a child. The spare bedroom was empty, and the living room lacked the warmth of a family space. James made a mental note to buy a crib, toys, and everything else a baby might need. "You deserve more than this," he whispered to Ethan, cradling him as they sat on the couch. The road ahead proved more challenging than James had anticipated. Social workers conducted home visits, scrutinizing his every move. Friends and colleagues questioned his decision, expressing concerns about how he would balance fatherhood with his demanding career. "James, are you sure about this?" asked Dr. Robert Price, the hospital's chief surgeon. "You've worked so hard to build your reputation. Raising a child alone could jeopardize everything." "I appreciate your concern," James replied evenly, "but Ethan is my priority now." Despite the skepticism, James remained steadfast. He threw himself into fatherhood with the same precision and dedication he brought to his surgeries. Late nights with crying fits and diaper changes became his new normal. But instead of feeling overwhelmed, James felt a sense of fulfillment he hadn't experienced in years. As weeks turned into months, Ethan thrived under James's care. The once-abandoned baby became a bright, giggling toddler who filled the house with laughter. James's colleagues noticed a change in him, too. The once reserved surgeon now carried photos of Ethan in his wallet and shared stories about his milestones during lunch breaks. "He said his first word yesterday," James said one day, his eyes lighting up. "What was it?" Sarah asked. "Dada," James replied, his voice filled with pride. James spent every free moment with Ethan, taking him to the park, reading bedtime stories and singing lullabies in his off-key voice. Ethan's laughter became the soundtrack of James's life, and the emptiness that had once consumed him was replaced with love and joy. But just as James began to feel that he and Ethan had settled into their new life, an unexpected phone call would change everything. One evening, as James prepared dinner, the phone rang. Balancing Ethan on his hip, he answered distractedly. "Dr. Lawson?" came a deep, unfamiliar voice. "Yes, this is he," James replied. "My name is Michael Andrews," the man said. "I believe I'm Ethan's biological father." James froze, his grip tightening on the phone. "What did you say?" "I've been searching for my son for years," Michael continued, his voice tinged with desperation. "I just found out he was left at that park. I need to see him." The room seemed to spin as James tried to process the words. He looked at Ethan, who was blissfully unaware, playing with a toy in his free hand. "I need time to think about this," James said, his voice tight. "Of course," Michael replied. "But please, Doctor, Lawson, I just want a chance to explain. I owe Ethan that much." After hanging up, James sank into a chair, his mind racing. What did this mean for Ethan? For their life together? The next day, James sat Ethan down, determined to explain the situation in a way the young boy could understand. "Ethan," he began gently, "there's someone who wants to meet you. He says he's your birth father." Ethan, now 4 years old, looked up at James with wide eyes. "What's a birth father?" James struggled to find the words. "A birth father is the person who helped bring you into the world, but I'm your dad and nothing will ever change that." Ethan tilted his head, processing the information. "Is he nice?" "I don't know," James admitted. "But we can find out together, if you want to." After a moment of silence, Ethan nodded. "Okay, Daddy." James pulled him into a hug, his heart heavy with uncertainty. Whatever lay ahead, he would face it with Ethan by his side. The day of the meeting arrived with a sense of unease. James and Ethan drove to a local cafe, the car filled with a silence that felt heavier than usual. Ethan fidgeted in his car seat, clutching his favorite stuffed bear. "Are you okay, buddy?" James asked, glancing at his son in the rearview mirror. Ethan nodded, though his small fingers gripped the bear tightly. "Are you coming with me, Daddy?" "Of course," James said firmly. "I'll be right there with you the whole time." They arrived at the cafe, and James spotted Michael Andrews seated at a table by the window. He was a tall man with broad shoulders, wearing a nervous expression as he sipped from a mug of coffee. "Ready?" James asked. Ethan nodded again, holding James's hand as they approached the table. Michael stood as they arrived, his eyes locking onto Ethan with a mixture of awe and emotion. "Ethan," he said softly, his voice trembling. Ethan looked up at James for reassurance, and James gave his hand a squeeze. "This is Michael," James said gently. "Hi," Ethan said shyly, his voice barely audible. Michael crouched to Ethan's eye level, his face filled with tenderness. "Hi, Ethan. I've been waiting a long time to meet you." They sat down, the tension palpable. James stayed close, his protective instincts on high alert. Michael seemed sincere, but James couldn't ignore the nagging doubt in the back of his mind. "I don't want to overwhelm you," Michael began, speaking directly to Ethan. "But I wanted to tell you how much I've thought about you and how sorry I am for not being there." Ethan looked at him curiously. "Why weren't you there?" Michael's shoulders sagged under the weight of the question. He took a deep breath before answering. "There were some very bad people in my life back then. Your mom thought leaving you somewhere safe was the best way to protect you." Ethan processed the information quietly, his brow furrowed. "But Daddy found me," he said, glancing at James. "He takes care of me now." Michael's eyes filled with tears. "I know, and I'm so grateful he found you. You're lucky to have such a good dad." James felt a lump form in his throat at Michael's words. He nodded, acknowledging the sentiment. Over the next few weeks, Michael made a concerted effort to prove his sincerity. He asked to spend time with Ethan in small, manageable increments, an afternoon at the park, a visit to the zoo. At first, Ethan was hesitant, clinging to James during every interaction. But gradually, Ethan began to warm up. Michael was patient, never pushing too hard, and he brought small gifts that showed he had been paying attention. A book about dinosaurs after Ethan mentioned his love for them. A set of crayons after noticing Ethan's drawings. One day, as James and Ethan walked home from one of these outings, Ethan tugged on James's hand. "Daddy." "Yes, buddy?" "Michael's nice," Ethan said thoughtfully. "But you're still my daddy, right?" James knelt to Ethan's level, looking him straight in the eye. "Always. Nothing will ever change that." Ethan smiled, throwing his arms around James's neck. As time passed, Michael became a more regular presence in Ethan's life. Though the relationship was still new and sometimes awkward, both men worked to ensure Ethan felt loved and secure. They began to communicate openly, sharing updates about Ethan's progress in school and working together to make decisions about his future. One evening, Michael stopped by James's house to drop off a book Ethan had left at his place. "Can I talk to you for a minute?" Michael asked after Ethan ran off to his room. Of course, James said, motioning for him to sit. Michael hesitated, searching for the right words. I just want to say thank you. For everything. You've given Ethan the kind of life I couldn't. James met his gaze, seeing the sincerity in his eyes. I did what anyone would do, he replied. No, Michael said firmly. You did what a father does, and I'll always be grateful for that. The two men sat in silence for a moment, a quiet understanding passing between them. Ethan's 7th birthday marked a turning point in their unconventional family dynamic. James and Michael worked together to throw a small party in James's backyard. They hung streamers, set up games, and baked a cake. When the party began, Ethan beamed with joy as he played with friends and blew out the candles on his cake. As the sun set, he ran up to both James and Michael, hugging them tightly. Best birthday ever, he exclaimed. As they watched Ethan run off to join his friends, James and Michael stood side by side, their differences set aside for the sake of the boy they both loved. Family's a funny thing, Michael said, a smile tugging at his lips. James nodded. It's not always what you expect, but sometimes it turns out even better. As Ethan grew into adolescence, his once boundless energy became channeled into new interests. He excelled in school, particularly in science and art, and his quick wit endeared him to his teachers and classmates. But with the teenage years came the inevitable challenges of self-discovery and identity. Ethan often found himself caught between two worlds, his life with James, the man who had raised him, and his growing connection with Michael, his biological father. Though the two men maintained a cordial relationship for Ethan's sake, the tension between them sometimes simmered beneath the surface. One evening, as Ethan sat at the kitchen table working on a biology project, he hesitated before speaking. Dad, he said, addressing James. James set down his coffee mug. What's on your mind, buddy? Do you ever feel, I don't know, like you don't fit in? Ethan's voice was unsure, and he avoided James's gaze. James leaned forward, his tone gentle. Sometimes? Why do you ask? Ethan shrugged, fiddling with his pencil. It's just, I don't look like you. Or Michael. I mean, I know you're both my dads, but it's still weird sometimes, like when people stare at us in public. James's heart ached at Ethan's words. He had always known these questions would arise, but hearing them aloud was harder than he had anticipated. Ethan, he began carefully, families come in all shapes and sizes. What matters isn't how we look, it's how we care for each other. But what about where I come from? Ethan asked, his eyes searching. James hesitated. Do you want to learn more about your heritage? Ethan nodded slowly. I think I do. James and Michael decided to work together to help Ethan explore his roots. They began by sharing stories about Ethan's biological mother, Maria. Michael brought over old photos, showing Maria's bright smile and the love she had for Ethan. She was strong, Michael told Ethan during one of their conversations. She faced a lot of challenges, but she always put you first. Ethan listened intently, his questions multiplying as he learned more about Maria and her family. Michael also took him to visit Maria's parents, who were overjoyed to reconnect with their grandson. They welcomed Ethan with open arms, sharing family traditions and stories that painted a vivid picture of his heritage. For the first time, Ethan felt a sense of belonging to something larger than himself. Despite the progress, the teenage years were far from smooth sailing. As Ethan's independence grew, so did his tendency to push boundaries. He began testing the limits at home and at school, earning a few detentions for talking back to teachers or skipping assignments. One evening, after Ethan came home late from hanging out with friends, James confronted him. Ethan, we've talked about this. You need to let me know where you are. Why? Ethan shot back. You're not my real dad anyway. The words hit James like a punch to the gut. He stood frozen for a moment before responding. Ethan, I love you and I've done everything I can to be here for you. I know you're upset, but that doesn't give you the right to be disrespectful. Ethan's anger wavered, guilt flickering in his eyes. He stormed upstairs without another word, leaving James feeling helpless. Later that night, Ethan found James sitting alone in the living room. "I'm sorry," Ethan said quietly, his voice thick with emotion. James looked up, his expression softening. "I know being a teenager isn't easy, but I need you to remember something. You're not alone. No matter what happens, I'm here for you." Ethan nodded, tears brimming in his eyes. "I know, Dad. Sometimes I don't know where I fit." James pulled Ethan into a hug. "You fit right here, son. Always." As the years went on, the family's bond continued to grow. Ethan learned to navigate the complexities of his identity with the support of both James and Michael. The two men worked as a team, attending school events together, helping with college applications, and providing guidance when Ethan struggled. Ethan thrived under their care, his confidence blossoming. He found joy in blending the lessons he had learned from both his fathers, James's steadfast dedication and Michael's resilience in the face of hardship. The day Ethan graduated from high school marked a turning point for the family. Standing between James and Michael as he accepted his diploma, Ethan felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. "You guys are the best dads I could have asked for," he said later at the celebratory dinner. "I wouldn't be here without you." James and Michael exchanged a proud smile, knowing their unconventional family had defied the odds. As Ethan prepared to leave for college, the three of them shared one final moment together in the living room. "Whatever comes next," James said, his voice steady, "remember that we're always here for you." "Always," Michael echoed, clapping a hand on Ethan's shoulder. Ethan nodded, his heart full. "I know. I love you both." And as Ethan stepped into his future, he carried with him the love, lessons, and unbreakable bond of the family that had chosen him, and had been chosen by him in return. Ethan's departure for college marked the beginning of a new chapter for the entire family. The house felt quieter, and James found himself wandering through the empty halls, missing Ethan's laughter and energy. Michael, too, felt the absence deeply, though he focused on staying busy with work. Despite the distance, they remained a close-knit family. Ethan called regularly, sharing stories about his classes, new friends, and life on campus. James and Michael took turns visiting him, often bringing care packages filled with homemade treats, books, and other reminders of home. One evening during his sophomore year, Ethan called James, his voice heavy with frustration. "Dad, I'm struggling in organic chemistry. No matter how much I study, I just can't get it." James, remembering his own struggles as a medical student, offered reassurance. "It's a tough class, Ethan, but you're capable. Let's break it down together over the weekend." When the weekend arrived, James drove to the campus with textbooks and notes from his own college days. They spent hours at a coffee shop, poring over formulas and reaction mechanisms. By the end of the session, Ethan felt more confident. "Thanks, Dad," Ethan said, a smile breaking through his stress. "I couldn't have done this without you." James's heart swelled with pride. "Anytime, buddy. That's what I'm here for." Michael also found ways to support Ethan, though his methods were more focused on life lessons. On one visit, Michael brought Ethan out to a diner near campus. Over burgers and fries, they talked about relationships, handling pressure, and finding balance in life. "Ethan," Michael said, leaning back in his chair, "success isn't just about grades or accomplishments. It's about figuring out who you are and what makes you happy. Don't forget to enjoy the ride." Ethan nodded, absorbing his father's advice. "Thanks, Dad. I needed to hear that." The summer before his senior year, Ethan secured an internship at a prestigious research lab, a significant step toward his goal of becoming a pediatric surgeon like James. The lab was located close to home, allowing him to live with James while working. Every evening, Ethan shared stories about his day at the lab. James listened intently, offering advice when needed. Michael often joined them for dinner, and their lively conversations filled the house with warmth and laughter. One night, Ethan looked at his father's, his voice tinged with emotion. You know, I've been thinking a lot about how lucky I am. Some people don't even have one good dad. I hit the jackpot with two. James and Michael exchanged a look, their eyes glistening. And we hit the jackpot with you, James said. Ethan's college graduation was a moment of triumph. Standing on the stage, he felt the weight of his journey, the love and sacrifices of his fathers, the challenges he had overcome, and the dreams still ahead. In the audience, James and Michael stood shoulder to shoulder, cheering loudly as Ethan accepted his degree. Their pride was unmistakable, and as Ethan looked out at them, he felt a deep sense of gratitude for the family that had shaped him. At the post-graduation celebration, Ethan raised a glass to his fathers. To James and Michael, he said, "Thank you for believing in me, for guiding me, and for always being there. I wouldn't be who I am today without you." The room erupted in applause, and James and Michael pulled Ethan into a tight embrace. In the years that followed, Ethan's journey continued to inspire those around him. He pursued medical school with the same determination that had carried him through his earlier challenges, often drawing on the lessons he had learned from both James and Michael. James, nearing retirement, found joy in mentoring Ethan as he navigated the rigorous demands of becoming a doctor. Michael, ever the cheerleader, reminded Ethan to celebrate his wins and stay grounded through setbacks. Ethan often reflected on the unconventional family that had raised him, marveling at how love and perseverance had triumphed over circumstance. As he stood one day in the hospital corridor, wearing his white coat and preparing to treat his first patient as a medical resident, Ethan glanced at the photo he kept in his pocket, a picture of himself as a child, held between James and Michael. With a deep breath, Ethan stepped into the room, carrying with him the strength of his fathers, the lessons of his past, and the promise of the future. As Ethan began his residency in pediatrics, his life became a whirlwind of hospital shifts, late-night studying, and the challenge of navigating adulthood. James watched with a mix of pride and nostalgia. He remembered his own residency years, the exhaustion, the exhilaration, and the relentless pursuit of excellence. Now he saw those same qualities reflected in Ethan. One evening, Ethan called James after a particularly long shift. His voice was heavy with emotion. "Dad, I had my first case where the outcome wasn't what I hoped for. A baby didn't make it, and I keep replaying everything in my mind, wondering if I could have done more." James's heart ached for his son. He had faced similar moments in his career and knew how deeply they could cut. "Ethan, sometimes we do everything right and it's still not enough. That's one of the hardest parts of being a doctor. But what matters is that you cared, that you gave everything you had to try and make a difference. That's what being a great doctor and a great person is all about." Ethan was quiet for a moment. "Thanks, Dad. It helps to hear that. I just wish I could do more." "You already are," James replied. "You're carrying on a legacy of compassion and dedication. I'm so proud of you." Michael played an equally important role in Ethan's life during this time. While James offered advice rooted in their shared profession, Michael provided balance, reminding Ethan of the importance of stepping away from the stress when possible. "You've got to take care of yourself too, son," Michael said during one of their weekly phone calls. "Burnout is real, and if you're not careful, it can sneak up on you. When was the last time you did something just for fun?" Ethan laughed, albeit tiredly. "Honestly, I don't even remember." "Well, make time," Michael insisted. "Even if it's just for an hour. Play some basketball, watch a movie, whatever makes you happy. You'll be a better doctor and a better you, if you do." Ethan took the advice to heart, carving out small moments to recharge. He'd call Michael for updates on family news, or text James about a particularly tricky case, leaning on both men in different ways. As years passed, Ethan grew into a confident, compassionate pediatrician, admired by colleagues and loved by his young patients. His fathers, though older now, remained active participants in his life. James, retired from surgery, found joy in visiting Ethan's hospital and attending events where Ethan was recognized for his contributions to the field. Michael, having started his own small contracting business, often joked about how he'd never imagined his name would be on the company van, while his son's name appeared on medical journals. "Not bad for a guy who barely made it through high school," he'd say with a chuckle. At family gatherings, Ethan often reflected on the unlikely path that had brought them all together. One Thanksgiving, as they sat around the table, Ethan raised his glass. "To Dad and Michael," he began, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "You both took on a role that could have scared anyone away. You didn't have to love me, but you did. You gave me a family, a home, and a future I could only dream of. Everything I am, everything I've achieved is because of you two." "Thank you." James's eyes shimmered with unshed tears, while Michael's face broke into a proud grin. "You've made us just as proud, son," James said. "We couldn't have asked for a better journey together." Michael added, "And remember, no matter how successful you get, you still owe me a basketball rematch." The laughter around the table was warm and genuine, a testament to the unbreakable bond they had built through love, resilience, and forgiveness. Ethan smiled, knowing that while his life had started with uncertainty, it had blossomed into something extraordinary, a story of family that had rewritten itself in the best possible way. As Ethan's career flourished, his personal life began to take shape in ways that filled James and Michael with both excitement and a touch of bittersweet nostalgia. It started when Ethan brought home someone special, a kind, witty woman named Olivia, who was studying to become a child psychologist. The first dinner they all shared was a blend of laughter and slightly awkward introductions. Olivia quickly charmed them with her warm personality, her quick humor, and her genuine interest in Ethan's upbringing. "So, Ethan's told me a little about you both," Olivia said, smiling as she passed the breadbasket to James. "But I'd love to hear more. How did you two manage to raise such an incredible person together?" James chuckled, glancing at Michael. "It wasn't always smooth sailing, that's for sure." Michael nodded, his grin widening. "Yeah, but one thing we always agreed on was putting Ethan first. Everything else came second." Ethan groaned, his cheeks reddening. Okay, enough about me. Olivia doesn't need to hear my entire life story in one night." James raised an eyebrow, teasing. "But it's such a good story." Over time, Olivia became a regular presence at family dinners, holidays, and even casual weekends. She fit seamlessly into the family, her love for Ethan shining through in every interaction. It wasn't long before Ethan called a family meeting. James and Michael arrived at his apartment, curious about the cryptic invitation. "So, what's the big news?" James asked as they sat down. Ethan hesitated for a moment, then pulled a small velvet box from his pocket. Opening it revealed a delicate engagement ring. "I'm going to propose to Olivia," he said, his voice a mix of excitement and nerves. Michael let out a low whistle, clapping Ethan on the back. "Wow, big step, kid. Does she know what she's getting into with you?" James shot Michael a look before turning to Ethan. "That's wonderful, son. Have you planned how you're going to do it?" Ethan nodded, explaining his idea to propose at a botanical garden Olivia loved. As they talked, James and Michael offered their advice, recalling their own relationships and the moments that had shaped their lives. The proposal went off without a hitch, and Olivia said yes, her tearful smile lighting up the room when Ethan brought her by to share the news. The family celebrated with champagne and toasts, the joy palpable as they looked ahead to the future. The wedding was a beautiful, intimate affair, held at a vineyard overlooking rolling hills. James walked Ethan down the aisle, his arm around his son's shoulder, while Michael gave a heartfelt toast at the reception. "To Ethan and Olivia," Michael began, raising his glass. "You two are proof that love has no limits, no boundaries of blood or background or anything else that gets in its way. Ethan, you've always made us proud. And Olivia, welcome to this crazy family. We couldn't be happier to have you." The years that followed were filled with new milestones. Ethan and Olivia welcomed their first child, a baby girl named Emily after James's late wife. Holding her granddaughter for the first time, James felt an indescribable warmth, a sense of everything coming full circle, Michael was equally smitten, insisting on being called Grandpa Mike, and spoiling Emily with toys and treats whenever he visited. "She's got your eyes," he told Ethan one afternoon, bouncing the baby on his knee. "And Olivia's stubbornness. Good luck with that." As Emily grew, the family traditions Ethan had cherished were passed down to her. Sunday dinners became multi-generational gatherings, with James and Michael sitting at the head of the table, watching the next chapter of their family unfold. One evening, as James and Michael sat on the porch after dinner, watching Emily chase fireflies in the yard, James turned to Michael. "You know, I wasn't sure we'd ever get here, back when everything felt so uncertain." Michael nodded, his gaze fixed on the flickering lights in the dark. "Me neither, but look at us now. We did good, James." James smiled. "Yeah, we did." The two men sat in comfortable silence, their bond forged through years of shared love, challenges, and triumphs. They had created something rare and beautiful, a family built on choice, on persistence, and on a love that defied expectations. Inside, Ethan watched his two fathers from the window, his heart full. He had always known they were extraordinary men, but seeing them now, as proud grandfathers and lifelong partners in raising him, he felt a gratitude too deep for words. The legacy of their love would carry on, woven into the fabric of every new chapter, every new life their family welcomed. Together, they had proven that family isn't defined by where you begin, but by the love you choose to give along the way. As the years passed, the Lawson Andrews family grew even closer, their bonds strengthened by shared experiences and new milestones. Ethan and Olivia welcomed a second child, a boy they named Samuel, honoring Michael's father. Samuel quickly became Emily's partner in crime, filling the house with laughter, sibling squabbles, and boundless energy. James and Michael embraced their roles as grandfathers with gusto. James, ever the nurturer, delighted in teaching Emily and Samuel how to bake cookies and build model rockets. Michael, meanwhile, became their unofficial adventure guide, taking them fishing, hiking, and even teaching Samuel how to ride a bike. One sunny afternoon, as Michael held the back of Samuel's bike and James cheered him on from the porch, Samuel finally wobbled forward on his own, his grin splitting his face. "I did it, Grandpa Mike! I did it!" Michael threw his hands in the air in celebration. "That's my boy, I knew you could do it." From the porch, James clapped and laughed. "Well done, Samuel. You've got a bright future ahead of you on two wheels." Later that evening, the family gathered around the dining table, the smell of James's lasagna wafting through the air. The kids recounted their adventures with animated enthusiasm, and James and Michael exchanged knowing smiles. After dinner, as the kids played in the living room, Ethan sat with his fathers in the kitchen, sipping coffee. "You know," Ethan said, his voice tinged with emotion, "watching you both with Emily and Samuel, it's amazing. You've taught me so much about what it means to be a dad." Michael grinned. "Well, you didn't make it easy for us, you know, all those late-night tantrums and teenage mood swings." Ethan laughed. "Yeah. Sorry about that." James placed a hand on Ethan's shoulder. "You've turned out to be an incredible father, Ethan, and seeing you with your family, it's the best reward we could ever ask for." Ethan smiled, his gratitude clear. "I'm just trying to follow the example you both set for me." As the family grew, so did the legacy of love and resilience that James and Michael had built. Holidays became cherished occasions, filled with laughter, traditions, and memories that deepened with each passing year. One Christmas, as the family gathered around the tree, Emily handed James a carefully wrapped gift. "Open it, Grandpa James," she said, bouncing with excitement. James unwrapped the package to reveal a photo album. Inside were pictures of the family spanning decades, Ethan as a baby, James and Michael at Ethan's high school graduation, the wedding, and now, Emily and Samuel's smiling faces. On the final page, a handwritten note read, "To Grandpa James and Grandpa Mike, thank you for showing us what love really means. We love you, Emily and Samuel." James's voice caught as he read the words aloud, his eyes misty. Michael wrapped an arm around his shoulder, both men overcome with emotion. Ethan watched his children with pride, feeling the profound weight of the family's journey. It had started with a chance encounter in a park and grown into a legacy that would endure for generations. As the fire crackled in the hearth and the family gathered close, Ethan looked around the room, his heart full. He knew that no matter what the future held, the love that had brought them together would carry them through. The story of their family was far from conventional, but it was theirs, a testament to the power of forgiveness, persistence, and unconditional love. And as James, Michael, and Ethan sat together, surrounded by the warmth of their family, they knew they had created something truly extraordinary. Years rolled on, and life brought its inevitable changes. Ethan, now a seasoned pediatrician, saw his children grow into their own unique personalities. Emily, ever curious and bold, excelled in school and shared her father's passion for science. Samuel, a quiet but fiercely creative boy, found his joy in painting and storytelling. James, now retired, spent his days gardening, writing letters to old friends, and relishing every moment with his grandchildren. Michael, still running his small contracting business part-time, found fulfillment in mentoring younger workers and sharing his story of resilience and redemption. One summer evening, the family gathered for a celebration of James's 75th birthday. The backyard was strung with twinkling lights and the scent of barbecue filled the air. Friends, neighbors, and extended family mingled, sharing stories about the man who had touched so many lives. Ethan stood to give a toast, raising his glass as the chatter quieted. "Dad," he began, looking directly at James, "you've been a constant in my life, a source of wisdom, strength, and unconditional love. You taught me not only how to be a doctor, but how to be a father. Your kindness and patience have shaped me in ways I'll carry forever." He turned to Michael. "And Dad, you've shown me what it means to fight for the people you love, to never give up even when the odds seem impossible. Your determination and humor have been a light in our family's life." Ethan paused, his voice thick with emotion. "Together, you've given me, Olivia, Emily, and Samuel the greatest gift of all, a family rooted in love and perseverance. We are who we are because of you. Happy birthday, Dad, and thank you to both of you for everything." The crowd erupted in cheers and applause as James wiped tears from his eyes, and Michael gave Ethan a proud nod. As the evening wound down, James sat on the porch with Emily and Samuel by his side. Emily rested her head on his shoulder, while Samuel leaned against his other arm, holding a notebook filled with his latest drawings. "Grandpa James," Emily said softly, "what's the best thing you ever did in your life?" James smiled, his gaze drifting to Ethan, who was laughing with Olivia and Michael by the fire pit. "Finding your dad," he said without hesitation. "That one decision brought me all of this." Samuel looked up at him, his young face serious. "Do you ever think about what would have happened if you didn't go to the park that day?" James nodded. "Sometimes. But life has a way of putting you exactly where you're meant to be. I was meant to find Ethan, just like I was meant to meet you two." Emily squeezed his hand. "I'm glad you went to the park, Grandpa. Our family wouldn't be the same without you." James kissed the top of her head. "And I wouldn't be the same without all of you." In the glow of the firelight, James reflected on the twists and turns that had brought them here. The unexpected encounter in the park, the struggles and triumphs of raising Ethan, the reconciliation with Michael, and the joy of watching their family grow. All of it had led to this moment of quiet contentment. As the stars came out, James felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. His life, though shaped by loss and uncertainty, had blossomed into something far greater than he could have imagined. It was a story of redemption, of love that transcended boundaries, and of the unshakable bonds that defined family. And as the laughter of his children and grandchildren filled the night, James knew that their story was far from over. It was simply continuing, carried forward by the love they shared and the legacy they had built together. As the years unfolded, James, Michael, Ethan, and the growing family continued to weave their story. Emily went on to pursue a career in environmental science, driven by her grandfather James's stories of healing and care, and her father Ethan's dedication to improving lives. Samuel became an artist, his vibrant paintings inspired by the stories of resilience and hope that defined his family. James and Michael, though slowing with age, remained active in the family's life. They often hosted Sunday dinners, their home a hub of love and connection. Even as their hair grayed and steps became slower, their hearts remained as full as ever, their legacy thriving in the laughter and accomplishments of their children and grandchildren. One crisp autumn afternoon, the entire family gathered in the park where James had first found Ethan. It had become a cherished tradition to return there, a way to honor the moment that started it all. Ethan, now with streaks of gray in his own hair, looked around at his family. Olivia sat beside him, holding his hand, while Emily and Samuel played with their own children nearby. James and Michael shared a bench under a tree, their faces serene as they watched the younger generations. "Dad," Ethan said, turning to James, "I don't think I've ever really thanked you for that day. For choosing me, for giving me a life I could never have dreamed of." James smiled, his eyes twinkling with warmth. "You don't have to thank me, Ethan. You were the gift I didn't know I needed. Choosing you wasn't just the best decision I ever made, it was the easiest." Michael chimed in, his voice steady despite the emotion behind it. "And for what it's worth, I'm grateful every day that you let me back into your life. You taught me that family isn't about perfection. It's about showing up no matter how messy things get." Ethan nodded, his throat tight with emotion. "I hope I can live up to what you both have given me. I hope I can pass that same love onto my kids." James reached over, placing a hand on Ethan's shoulder. "You already have. Look at them," he said, gesturing to Emily and Samuel. "They're thriving because of you, because of the love and dedication you show every day. That's your legacy now." The sun dipped lower in the sky, casting a warm golden glow over the park. The family gathered for a group photo, their laughter echoing as they squeezed together. James and Michael sat at the center, surrounded by the generations they had nurtured. As the camera clicked, capturing the moment, James thought about how far they had come. The story had begun with uncertainty, loss, and an abandoned baby in a park. But it had grown into something extraordinary. A family bound not by blood, but by choice, love, and resilience. As the years continued to roll on, James and Michael eventually passed, leaving behind a family that carried their values forward. Ethan often shared stories of his fathers with Emily and Samuel, ensuring that their legacy of love and perseverance remained alive in the hearts of future generations. And though life moved on, that one moment in the park remained the foundation of it all, a testament to the power of kindness, the courage to take a chance, and the enduring strength of love. The Lawson Andrews family proved that no matter how unconventional the beginning, a family built on love can create a legacy that lasts forever.